Well, Sarah Palin has stepped down as governor of Alaska. Fighting a seemingly endless string of harassment lawsuits has pretty much taken all of her time and about $500,000 of her money. That's real money to the Palins, that's real money to me, and that's probably real money to you too. At least 15 ethics complaints have been leveled against Governor Palin, and all of them have been dismissed as baseless, but that's kind of beside the point, isn't it? Decent people, like most of you out there, probably don't appreciate just how easy it is to destroy someone of integrity if you have no integrity of your own. Here's how it works. Assorted liberal bloggers and miscreants of various stripes launch unsubstantiated ethics complaints against the governor of Alaska, who, because of Alaska state law, is not immune from having to fight them. 15 charges of corruption, no matter whether they're true or not. That means that the public hears nothing but the words Palin and corruption being solemnly reported by the press. And that's all it takes. False accusations. Consider this. Bill Clinton spent every second of his presidency, every second, knowing exactly what to say if the words Paula Jones or Jennifer Flowers or Monica Lewinsky came up in conversation or at a press conference or even the middle of a deep sleep. If Hillary just whispered the words Monica Lewinsky, Bill would bolt upright and say, "I did not have sex with that woman, whichever one you mentioned." He's ready for the accusations because he knows he's guilty. That's what guilty people do all day. They work on the explanation and the alibi. But an innocent person, when charged with corruption or lying or worse, well, it puts them off their game. It shakes them to the core, the same way it would shake you to your core if you were accused of some heinous act that you did not commit. And if these false accusations come at you again and again and again, how many times would it take before you said, "To hell with this, who needs this? This is destroying my family"? A guilty person has that factored going in. It's part of their mental equation. But it's enough to drive an innocent person out. And that was the goal, wasn't it? You know, there's a reason the word Satan means the accuser in Hebrew, and why thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor is one of the 10 Commandments. It's because a false accusation against an innocent person is often more effective than a real accusation is against a guilty one. The example of Sarah Palin, you see, is fatal to the liberal worldview. For 40 years now, liberals have defined feminism in a binary way. You simply could not be a feminist, and by implication, you could not really demand the opportunities that modern feminism promised unless you categorically came down on the side of choice. You could go out into a man's world, dress like a man, act like a man, achieve all the wealth and the power of a man, perhaps even have a boutique single child or two if you could afford a decent nanny. But Sarah Palin's decision to see her Down syndrome child to term was an act of such blinding moral clarity that it tore down the drapes and flung open the windows of Miss Havisham's fetid little parlor. To see Trig Palin being held in his sister's arms reminded the entire country that this choice has consequences. And furthermore, it showed that you could be mayor or governor or potentially president of the United States and still have a big family, dress and talk like a woman, and get there with a husband who was nothing more or less than a good man, a loving husband, and a commercial fisherman, and not ride to power on the coattails of a billionaire businessman or a media mogul or a political superstar. To present such a clear example of competence, achievement, and respect, while at the same time running full in the face of liberal feminists' first and only commandment, Sarah Palin earned the kind of hatred from the left that is only well and truly reserved for those people who so effortlessly put the lie to their entire philosophy. Now, this is the kind of hate that's reserved for Black Americans like Thomas Sowell or like my buddy Alfonso Rachel, who become traitors to their race as Palin became a traitor to her sex for having the audacity, the gall, the unmitigated nerve to have her own thoughts and to make up their own minds and to free themselves from the rigid and racist and sexist roles that have been cut out for them by the liberal establishment that perpetually shrieks that it is only working in their best interest out of a rarefied sense of moral superiority. And now we get to the heart of the matter, because it's not just Democrats and liberals who so fervently wish to see her destroyed. Many Republicans felt exactly the same way. The LA Times reports, quote, "I am of the strong opinion that, at present day, she is not ready to become the leading voice of the GOP," said Todd Harris, a party strategist who likened Palin to the hopelessly dated Miami Vice, something once cool that people regard years later with puzzlement and laughter, unquote. The Times then goes on to quote one Stuart K. Spencer, who's been advising GOP candidates for more than 40 years, who says, quote, "I can't tell you one thing that she brought to the ticket," unquote. Well, Mr. Harris and Mr. Spencer, I'm not a GOP strategist, so unfortunately, I'm not able to associate myself with the glory and the success that people like you have led the Republican Party to in these last few election cycles. Here's what I can tell you, though. As a person of small reputation and little backwater pools on the internet, I spent months defending John McCain as the Republican nominee. Not because he was my first choice or my second choice or my third choice, because he wasn't. I did it because I felt I had some idea of what this Obama tsunami was going to bring. And I saw with my own eyes, pay attention now, professional GOP strategists, untold numbers of lifelong conservatives saying that they were going to just sit this one out. They're just going to stay home on Election Day. And then Sarah Palin came along, and those same people, those exact same people, wrote how they were now sending in checks and asking for the lawn signs because for the first time in years, they felt there was someone who understood what their lives were like, someone who went hunting and fishing, someone who worked hard for a living, someone who had fought corruption where they found it, someone who had a son fighting in Iraq, someone who knew how to handle a gun and actually owned one, someone who unabashedly loved America, someone who could be tough and decisive and still be feminine, someone who put family above politics and who was doing a job with quiet competence and who by most accounts did not spend every living day of her life maneuvering and plotting and kissing ass because she had some defective political gene that drove her to become president from the age of 3. Sarah Palin, clinging with an incandescent lack of bitterness to her guns and her religion, energized the base of this party in a way I have never witnessed before. Now, of course, I need to again remind you that I am not a professional GOP strategist, but just between me and actual Republican strategist Stuart K. Spencer, who does not know what she brought to the ticket, I'll tell you right now, I'll clue you in. Mr. Spencer, she brought just about every vote that the Republicans got. Those people, those actual conservatives that went out and voted, don't think Sarah Palin cost John McCain the election. They think John McCain cost Sarah Palin the election. It was John McCain's elitist genius advisors that buried her for 2 weeks after her GOP knockout acceptance speech. That speech put the McCain-Palin ticket up 7 to 15 points in the week after Barack Obama's temple coronation, and hid her in a basement trying to polish her up to Midtown Manhattan standards of sophistication and erudition, and then they walked her into back-to-back ambush interviews. It was these elitist campaign staffers that decided to buy $150,000 of high-end clothes for a woman who always looks best when she is dressed as who she is, a regular working person. And of course, those clothes went on to become another of the corruption and the diva charges leveled against her to protect their own miserable, anonymous, cowardly asses so that they can continue to advise future campaigns into the dustbin of history. Look, let's wrap this up by getting to brass tacks here. This isn't a fight between Democrats or Republicans or even between liberals and conservatives. This is a fight to the death between populists and the elites. Sarah Palin is the anti-Obama. He is urban, she is rural. He preaches dependency on the government, and she leads a life of independence. He constantly apologizes for the sins of this country he was elected to lead, and she is unabashedly proud of it. He opposes the war in Iraq, she has skin in the game, and so on and so on. And that is why she had to be destroyed from the Democratic Party, the New York media elites, and all of the inside the Beltway voices of various and sundry GOP strategists. She needs to be destroyed because the one thing that can never be allowed to happen is this. You people at home, cannot have a voice in the political debate. You know who I mean. You rubes, you hicks out there in flyover country. Your job is to pay taxes, vote for whoever we've decided over cocktails makes us feel better about ourselves, and occasionally provide your inbred idiot sons and daughters for the Army or the police force or whatever else you people out there without Ivy League educations do with your tawdry little lives. Meanwhile, the Harvard-educated elitist geniuses will run the country according to their infinitely brighter intellectual and moral lights. And whatever happens, do not be distracted by inconvenient facts that you might stumble upon as you listen to your faux news or your hate-filled talk radio or those right-wing nutjob blogs you read. Pay no attention to the fact that small banks run by rubes like yourselves were in no financial troubles at all, lending money and writing mortgages to people who could actually afford to pay it back, but who are now being forced to pay for the failure of genius-level Harvard Business School ideas like collateralized debt obligations, which essentially brought down the greatest economy that the world has ever seen. And remember, it's just a coincidence that Harvard grads like John F. Kennedy and Robert S. McNamara not only got us into the Vietnam War, they determined the genius-level rules of engagement that caused inbound naval aviators to look down at but not attack the surface-to-air missiles being unloaded at Haiphong Harbor. They'd see those same missiles again in a few weeks when they were shot down and killed by them. That's genius-level Harvard-quality thinking. Not like that simpering idiot, that commonplace dolt Ronald Reagan. I mean, that man went to Eureka College, for God's sakes. Who's even heard of Eureka College? The fact that he defied 40 years of Harvard-educated State Department officials and defeated the Soviet Union with plain speaking and common sense and some antiquated, embarrassing, and one might even say tacky, belief in his country and its people, well, that's surely a coincidence as well. Just keep writing the checks and vote according to the narrative, and they'll do the rest. Here's a final quick little thought for you. A man named Saul Alinsky once wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. Hillary Clinton wrote about it in her senior's thesis. And if Hillary Clinton learned from it, Barack Obama taught from it. The term community organizer was coined by Alinsky, and it was the centerpiece of his theory that the socialization of America could best be accomplished from within, since Americans were alert to revolutions being forced upon them from the outside. Now, one of these rules for radicals is, quote, make the enemy live up to his or her own book of rules, unquote. Think about the genius of that. Just let that sink in for a minute. When a Republican has an ethics scandal, it's hypocrisy and double standards and all the rest. But when a Clinton or a Pelosi or a Charlie Rangel or a Chris Dodd or a Barney Frank or a William Jefferson has an ethics scandal, no one bats an eye. Why? Because of course they're immoral. They're Democrats. Alinsky could see that moral people have to be held to moral standards when immoral people do not. And we'd better learn a lesson from this, and right quick. Here's an example of the kind of lesson that good and decent people must learn about people like Saul Alinsky and his followers. The Battle of Guadalcanal was one of the first real tests of the U.S. Marine Corps in World War II. There was real anger towards the Japanese after Pearl Harbor and the atrocities they had committed in China, and to the American prisoners at Bataan. But the Marines had not yet dealt with them face to face and still reserved a professional soldier's decency towards surrendering troops. During the Battle of Guadalcanal, a Marine recon unit reported seeing Japanese troops flying a white flag on an isolated spit of land near the main island. And so a Marine named Frank Getka asked for volunteers to help rescue these surrendering Japanese soldiers. 25 men stepped forward, and when they reached the beach, the Marines warily went ashore to help the trapped Japanese. Once they were all in range, the Japanese opened fire with machine guns, and after hours of fighting, only one Marine was able to escape. As he swam away, he looked over his shoulder and saw the flashing samurai swords of the Japanese officers as they hacked at and beheaded the Marine survivors. Now, when reinforcements returned, they found that their buddies had been mutilated and dismembered, and any Marine Corps tattoos had been hacked off of their arms and stuffed into their mouths. And the Marines never treated the Japanese the same way again after that. Alinsky's followers want you to believe that if you fight dirty in response to people fighting dirty with you, you've lost your morals and in fact you've lost your identity. But that's a lie. We are in a political fight to the death with people who would stop at nothing. Nothing. I'm not talking about garden variety Democrats. I mean these Alinsky leftists. And if we don't face the same realization as those Marines on Guadalcanal and give back as brutally as we have taken, then we will lose, which is what they want. And if we fail to fight back, there will be no more decent people in politics. As of today, we're one short already.